Greetings Pathfinders and welcome back to Absalom Archives Geography. Today we'll be taking our first deep dive into a region of the Inner Sea. Varisia is where we'll be going, and it's a fitting start to our tour. After all, it's the first place players were really allowed to sink their teeth into. But before we get started, a quick little shout out. This video is brought to you by my desire to spread the love to cool people, and one of those people is Raven Brew Dice. Handmade dice for all your rolling needs. Head on over to ko-fi.com/ravenbrewdice for a set of your own today. Link in the description. Take that, Rico. The first Pathfinder adventure published was... Okay, so technically it was the modules Hollow's Last Hope and Crown of the Kobold King, but the first adventure path was Rise of the Runelords, which takes place almost entirely in Varisia. The first book, Burnt Offerings, gave players their first peek at the region, setting the stage for decades of adventure. With that in mind, was there really anywhere else we could start? And since this is our first breakdown, let's set up our format going forward. We'll start with the region's geography, where it is on the map and what's around it. We'll move into the history of the region, from ancient times into modern day. Then we'll cover the inhabitants, both the cultures that live here and the notable flora and fauna. Finally, we'll end with the notable locations and landmarks. With that in mind, it's time to unroll our map and take a look at Varisia. Varisia is a large region located in northwestern Avestan. The western and southern borders are formed by the Arcadian Ocean, the southern section being called Conqueror's Bay. The northern border is formed by the Kodar Mountain range, which separates Varisia from the land of the Linorm Kings, Irisin, and the realm of the Mammoth Lords. Meanwhile, the Mindspan Mountains roughly form the eastern border, separating Varisia from the hold of Belkzen, Nirmathas, and Nadal. It wouldn't be entirely correct to say that Varisia is isolated. There are paths through the mountains, and the coast is pretty open. But it is on the fringe, the edge where civilization gives way into wilderness. None of the neighbors are very friendly, with Nadal, Belkzen, and Irisin being particularly closed off. Raiders from the Linorm kingdoms mostly sailed around Varisia, avoiding the sparse population in favor of richer targets. But that is shifting as the colonies founded by southern nations continue to thrive on the Varisian frontier. The southern and western parts of the region are full of scattered mountain ranges and lowland forests. Running through the middle of the region in a diagonal curve is a sharp cliff edge that marks the start of the Storval Plateau. Called the Storval Rise, this striking formation divides Varisia roughly in half. The lowlands are fertile and full of colonies and settlers making their way to the frontier. Meanwhile, the highlands are full of displaced natives struggling to survive alongside the people and creatures that have always called that place home. This gives Varisia a large variety of biomes to use for all kinds of stories and adventures, and it's also the start of a theme of duality and division that you'll see crop up throughout the region's history and cultures. Just like the Rise divides the region geographically, Earthfall divides Varisia historically. Now, every nation in the Inner Sea was impacted by Earthfall. It's kind of a big deal, meteorite coming down. But for Varisia, that change is incredibly drastic, wiping an entire magical country off the map. Before Earthfall, Varisia was Thassalon, the Empire of Sin. Because of that, we won't be talking much about pre-Earthfall Varisia. I've got a whole separate video talking about Thassalon's lore, so go watch that if you're curious. For now, we'll jump forward in time to just after Earthfall and look at what came after Thassalon. Now, when Earthfall hit, Thassalon had two immediate problems. The first, obviously, was the giant continent-sized meteor that just hit the planet. Large portions of the coast were destroyed or flooded, killing an untold number of people. The second problem was that all the Runelords were gone, each having sealed themselves away as part of a contingency to survive the disaster. This might seem like a boon, since they were all assholes, but they were also the entire power structure and government. This left Thassalon with a lack of clear leadership, which is always just great during a world-shattering catastrophe. As a result, records from the Age of Darkness are spotty and hard to find, but we know that after 1,000 years, Thassalon as a nation was just gone. The various monsters fled to the wilderness or took up residence in the abandoned cities. The Rune Giants especially almost completely disappeared, some being sealed away with the Runelords, while others were killed in rebellions by the slaves they could no longer control. The few that remained lived very secluded lives, fading into legend. Their legacy would survive with the native giants of Varisia as fables, scary boogeymen of the long-forgotten past. Most of Varisia's elves fled back to Castrovel, with the few that stayed heading underground. Functionally, they left the region until 2632, when elves as a whole returned to Galarian to battle Tree Razor. As for the halflings, we don't have a great record of what happened to them. I can speculate that they fell in with the native Varisian humans and from there migrated throughout the Inner Sea, but we don't have a clear answer. We do know that the Othobon halfling culture seems to have died with Thassalon, though. During the Age of Darkness, both orcs and dwarves emerged from the Darklands. The orcs would spread across Avestan before eventually being concentrated into the hold of Belkzen to the east of Varisia. While the majority of the dwarves would settle elsewhere, they did establish a sky citadel in the Mindspan Mountains, called Yanderhof, which remains to this day. The dwarves there maintain a cordial trade relationship with both the natives and colonists of Varisia, with many other ancestors residing inside their city. Now with the humans, quite a bit happened. Thassalon's warrior caste banded together, their military training giving them a distinct advantage in surviving. Many of them stayed close to important Thassalonian sites, either for potential safety or out of a fear that the Runelords would be returning quickly. As time went on and their old masters stayed dormant, these groups started to forget what these structures were for. Generations removed from their slavery, they only remembered ancient tales of cruel leaders and horrible monsters. A lot of these old buildings and monuments became sacred sites, divorced from their original purpose. These people would eventually be called the Shawanti, and their numerous clans, or Kwa as they are known in the Shawanti language, spread out all over the region. We'll discuss them and their culture later in the video. The second group of humans that called Varisia home are the Varisians. I know you're shocked, but please keep it together. For the children, please. Also descended from Thessalonians, the Varisians largely came from the provider caste. Presumably this means farmers, tradesmen, and merchants, though we don't know for sure. They survived through the Age of Darkness as a nomadic people, wandering all across Golarion. As the skies cleared, Varisians looked to the stars for more guidance. For nomads, navigation is very important, and Golarion's pole star of Cynosure is one of the most obvious reference points. And so it makes sense that many Varisians would come to worship Desna, goddess of stars and travel, who is said to live in Cynosure. Some Varisians worship her exclusively, while others venerate her as part of a pantheon called the Cosmic Caravan. Varisians also have a strong tradition of divination using an item called the Harrow Deck. Traditionally made of 54 cards representing various attributes and cosmic alignments, Harrow Decks and their divinations are a sacred rite to the Varisian people. This isn't a closed tradition, but very few people outside the Varisians take the time to learn it. Harrowing has continued into the modern day, weathering the death of prophecy quite well, its divination still accurate enough for most Varisians to swear by it. For most of the region's history, these two cultures lived in a fairly peaceful cohabitation. They would clash with the orcs in the neighboring hold of Belkzen, goblin tribes that moved in from the coastlands, and occasionally skirmish with Kellid and Ulfin raiders from farther north, but there's no record of large-scale battles or protracted wars. What I find a little ironic is that a separate nation founded by Varisians, Ustalav, was incredibly pivotal to the Shining Crusade, which is a defining conflict in Avastan's history. But that conflict largely ignored Varisia itself in favor of wealthier targets farther south. With Thassalon fading into the mist of history, Varisia was reclaimed by the wilderness. Right up until Cheliax enters the picture. In 4405, the Chelish Emperor Halak IV charged two military leaders, Field Marshal Jarkathian Korvosa and Admiral Mercadio Kayamelu, with founding a city in Varisia. After a battle for royal funding that saw Korvosa victorious, Chelish forces moved north into a part of Varisia called the Bloodsworn Vale. Over the next year, they moved deeper and deeper into the region, eventually coming across a large pyramid structure. Located on the coast near a natural bay at the end of Conqueror's Bay, Field Marshal Korvosa determined it would be the perfect military defense point. The fact that it was considered a sacred site by the native Shawanti who were still currently living there was deemed not relevant to him. Their actions in the Bloodsworn Vale had already angered the Shawanti, and this second offense would eventually spark that anger into a full-blown war. The Chelish forces established Fort Korvosa on a small island off the coast to act as both trade hub and military staging ground. It would later be supported by two additional settlements nearby, Pollen's Cove, founded by a Chelish naval commander as a secondary location, and Veldrain, a settlement that overlooks the entrance to the bay where Korvosa is located. This gave Cheliax de facto naval control of the region, at least in terms of large-scale ships. The Shawanti tended to prefer smaller canoes, more suited to tiny raiding parties, which had its advantages, but was at a clear disadvantage against the larger Chelish naval ships. Like I said, most of the initial Chelish forces would be concentrated on the island just off the coast, in what is now called Conqueror's Bay. Named Endron Isle, it would be the staging ground used by Chelish explorers to push into Varisia proper. This would be where most of the conflict with the Shawanti took place, the Chelish forces trying many times to establish a proper mainland settlement. The fort's strong defensive position allowed the colonists to repel Shawanti attacks, as well as launch their own counter-raids against the tribes. The Shawanti did have some victory, such as destroying the settlement of Kiamelu in 4410, or the Great Fire of 4429. Shawanti warriors burned most of Fort Korvosa to the ground, killing many important leaders and much of the civilian population. Of particular note was the near destruction of a mercenary band called the Sable Company. A band of hippogriff riders, the Sable Company had been founded just after Fort Korvosa's construction and made numerous raids against the Shawanti people. Their cruelty was well known, and their near destruction was a particularly cathartic win for the Shawanti. This one act might have removed the Chelish from Varisia completely if it hadn't been for a single person's divine visions. Alika Epikena was the first child ever born in Fort Korvosa and had been blessed with great oracular power by Pharasma. She used these powers quite often to ensure the city's success against the Shawanti. Prior to the Great Fire, she had a vision that showed her both the fire and her death while fighting it. Though she was able to warn the city's Lord Magistrate, his request for help arrived too late to stop the fire or prevent her death. The reinforcements arrived 1 week after the fire had burned out, just in time to reinforce the remaining people and keep the city from being completely lost. 9 years later, Fort Korvosa had been rebuilt on a strong stone foundation. The Shawanti, who now fully occupied the nearby pyramid structure named Grand Mastaba, would continue their raids on Fort Korvosa. Anything built outside the protective stone walls would be destroyed, and any Chelish landing point would be pushed back. Then, in 4446, the Chelish forces were able to break through, pushing forward and laying siege to Grand Mastaba. The siege lasted 3 years, and the Shawanti defenses would hold until 4449, when the Chelish finally overran the position and drove them off. This defeat would so heavily harm the local Shawanti that the colonists wouldn't face any united resistance for over a decade. But when that resistance did resume, the fighting would be much fiercer. In 4462, the Shawanti leader Galstrac Sevendeaths united 2 Shawanti clans, the Sun Clan and the Skull Clan, into an army. They assaulted Fort Korvosa and Palin's Cove, laying siege to both locations. This would start what would be known as the Last Shawanti War, though I'm sure that title was at least 1 word shorter back when it was being fought. The war would rage for 26 years, with Galstrac being killed 7 times, but resurrected each time to fight again. Hence, the name? I wonder if he updated it after every death? Anyway, the semi-immortality of their leader galvanized the Shawanti, who fought fiercely, but this would also be their eventual downfall. In 4488, the Korvosan Guard killed Galstrac for the 8th time, but this time they managed to capture and retain his body. Without the body to perform the ritual on, the Shawanti were unable to resurrect him again, and the united clans broke apart. This would mark the end of the united Shawanti resistance against Chelish colonists and begin a period of expansion for Korvosa. By 4507, 100 years after the city's founding, the Shawanti had largely been pushed out of the lowlands and into the Storval Plateau, where they would face fierce competition for resources with local stone giant tribes and the monsters that made their lairs in the nearby mountain range. While the Shawanti clans knew the area enough to survive, it was a much harsher existence. To this day, the Shawanti despise the Chelish, though many have given up on removing the colonists entirely. After all, it's now been centuries, and only a massive shakeup to the region could possibly remove them. With the interior of Varisia now more open to them, more and more colonists flock to the region. Numerous small towns and cities are founded by various explorers. It's important to remember that there were already people living in these areas, not just the Shawanti, but also the Varisians, who had quite a few settlements in the region. The Chelish either ignored this or took over these locations by force. The Varisians never went to war with the Chelish like the Shawanti did, but the Chelish colonists discriminated against them all the same. The only notable location free from Chelish influence in the lowlands is the ancient city of Kermaga. This city is properly old, having existed during Thassalon's time and continued into the modern day. Built on a strange hexagonal rock base, the city has extensive underground sections that allowed its residents to survive Earthfall and remain self-sufficient into the modern day. In 4558, the city of Riddleport gained its first pirate overlord, which is as good a time as any to mark the city's official founding. It was initially just a pirate haven for vessels raiding Chelish shipping in and out of the region, and has maintained a lawless reputation ever since, even after becoming large enough to be seen as legitimate. As for why it's called Riddleport, well, we'll get into that a little later. In 4569, the town of Basleaf was the first location to suffer what would be a recurring disaster in Varisia. Founded 6 years earlier, Basleaf is a mining town that provides raw materials to the region, competing with the dwarven settlement of Janderhof. It's also the first town to be attacked by a local dragon named Glarataxis. A massive red monster, Glarataxis would swoop in, rain fire and destruction down on a location, and then leave just as quickly, never communicating with anyone. Decades would pass between these attacks, with the last recorded one being in 4676 against Korvosa, Palin's Cove, and Veldraine. In 4584, a champion of Aerodim named Alcadian Indros set out into western Varisia, where he found the remains of a giant Thessalonian bridge called the Irespan. Setting up camp, he was attacked by a giant sea monster, which he killed in single combat despite fighting underwater while dressed in full plate. This is a bit like a bird being beaten to death by a brick that never leaves the ground. Regardless, after climbing out of the sea, he declared the city founded here would be named Magnamar, which means Stone of the Sea. Magnamar would become a haven for Korvosans who wanted to remain in the region but be out from under Cheliak's thumb. There's an obvious irony here, but we'll look past that. Magnamar had a steady trickle of growth over the next few years, before the beginning of the Age of Lost Omens turned that into a flood. In 4608, numerous Korvosans immigrated to Magnamar, fed up with the city's continued connection to the increasingly unstable Chelish government. With a population now rivaling Korvosa, Magnamar would become an incredibly powerful independent city-state on Varisia's western coast. As the city grew, 4 Magnamaran families wanted to expand farther north along the Lost Coast. In 4666, they created the Sandpoint Merchants League and set out to a site they deemed suitable for a town. When they arrived, they found a group of Varisians already living there, holding the site as a traditional winter stopping post for groups traveling along the coast. Unwilling to just find somewhere else, the Merchants League started negotiating with the Varisians. Negotiations stalled, and eventually one of the families making up the Merchants League, the Scarnettis, decided to resolve the matter. By which I mean drunkenly murder Varisians and pin it on local goblins. And while getting drunk probably made them more in character when it came to impersonating and incriminating goblins, it did not help their effectiveness. Instead, they only managed to kill 5 people before being driven off, with 3 of their number being captured. This stalled negotiation for several months, especially once word got back to Magnamar. The city had a much better relationship with the Varisians, to the point of having a specific ruling body to address their cultural needs and concerns. This gave the Varisians demanding justice much more leverage than they would have in many other situations. Eventually, a man named Alma Deverin negotiated a settlement where the Varisians would receive a 40% share of Sandpoint's profits for the next 40 years, as well as a dedicated temple to Desna in the town. With this deal accepted, Sandpoint was founded and lives on to this day. In fact, this arrangement has recently been renewed in 4706 for another 20 years. Which almost brings us to the modern day, where things are really starting to happen in Varisia. To properly cover that, we need to talk about a giant whose actions would change the course of history forever. The stone giant tribes of the Storval Plateau value physical strength, but will tolerate members of the tribe born without it because they can often manifest innate magical ability. Mokmurian was born smaller and weaker than average, which meant he'd have to rely on his magic to get ahead in his tribe. Only problem is he wasn't born with any of that either. Obviously not content to just remain a disgraced runt, Mokmurian sought out a way to gain the respect he felt he deserved. He studied what writing he could find and learned magic the academic way, through wizardry. Unfortunately for him, the stone giants of the plateau don't like wizards very much, largely due to lingering cultural memory of their Thessalonian masters. After being discovered, Mokmurian's spellbooks were burnt and he was cast out of the tribe. Now alone, angry, and hungry for more power, as well as probably just literally hungry, a lone stone giant is actually pretty easy prey for a lot of monsters. Mokmurian traveled to a place his tribe considered forbidden, the Valley of the Black Tower. Here he entered a tower called Jorgenfist, where he found ancient Thessalonian writings. He learned about the Rune Lords and the city of Zinjalast. This sent him north into the mountains, seeking the old Thessalonian capital. And he did eventually find it. He made his way inside the city, parleying with the various monsters that laired in the secluded ruins. After a time, he found the heart of the city, the tomb of Karzug. The Rune Lord was locked in suspension here, the apprentices that were supposed to awaken him after Earthfall having died in the disaster. But while Mokmurian wasn't powerful enough to free Karzug, his greedy soul was strong enough to rouse the Rune Lord, and his magic was good enough to make a connection. In a sense, Mokmurian died that day, the body now a puppet for Karzug's will. In a different sense, he was reborn with a new purpose, returning Karzug and the might of Thassalon into an unsuspecting world. Now this caused a lot of things to happen, but most immediately, Karzug's awakening sent a surge of energy out from his rune well, which set off the lesser ones all across Varisia. Not just his, but all the ones connected to every rune lord. Now for most of them, this didn't do anything. The energy dissipated harmlessly since the rune wells were either buried deep underwater, deep underground, or in various out-of-the-way locations. But Sandpoint was located just on the border of what was once Shalast and Bakrak Han, and directly below the town was a rune well attuned to Wrath. The energy of the rune well permeated the town, causing disturbing dreams and driving select townfolk into violence. The first up is Longiku Kaijitsu, head of the local glassmakers and descendant of one of the founders of Sandpoint, who'd been angry for years about his wife cheating on him. That night, he took his revenge by pushing her off his balcony to her death. This murder has gone undiscovered for years, having been buried by other local events. Secondly, we have Nualia Tobin, a local Empyrean Nephilim who had been raised as a blessed child paraded around by her adopted father as proof of his own holiness. Growing up with a mixture of reverence, isolation, and jealousy, she fell prey to a local boy's charms. The romance ultimately left her pregnant, broken-hearted, and sullied in the eyes of her self-righteous father. The Runewell's energy spurred her to action. She pledged herself to Lamashtu, who took the child as payment for the power to get revenge. Nualia locked her father in the church, burned it to the ground, and fled into the night, where the locals presumed her dead. Remember Nualia's name, she'll come up in another video very soon. And finally, there's the tale of Jervis Stute. Stute lived in Sandpoint and worked as a carpenter. He was most well known for his intricate wood carvings of birds that he would place on any wooden surface he could find. He always asked permission, but his birds were so prized that anyone would agree to it. He would never work on commission or take requests, saying that he was simply freeing the carving trapped in the wood. Jervis himself lived in a small house outside of town, set atop a small tidal island where birds tended to gather. You might be picking up a bird thing here, and I have some very bad news about this wholesome artistic hobby. While it started out innocently enough, Stute had been changed after finding a statue on the shore one day. Depicting a bird-faced man, this statue was an idol to the demon lord Pazuzu. The statue's influence was subtle at first, but grew more insidious as Stute spent more time with it. Eventually, he fell under the statue's influence and heeded the demon lord's commands. For 15 years, from 4687 to 4702, Stute led a double life as Sandpoint's only serial killer, the Chopper. Now, as you can tell from the timeline, the Runewell didn't cause Stute to become a killer, but it did compel him to act with a little more reckless abandon on his kill that night. He killed 2 people, one of which was the town's sheriff, and he didn't properly cover his tracks home. Now, he was so well loved around town that many simply thought Stute would be the Chopper's next victim. They didn't know what to say when they found him dead atop a demonic altar decorated with the bodies of his victims. His house was burned to the ground, his every carving destroyed, and Sandpoint does its best to forget he ever stalked their streets. This confluence of events is now referred to as the Late Unpleasantness, and Sandpoint has only just finished recovering from all the damage. We spent a lot of time on Sandpoint here at the end of this history, and that's because it's home to the most recent events as well as the most relevant to our story going forward. In fact, it's so relevant I'll be making a whole video just going over the town, so look forward to that. And that's the basic history of Varisia. There's more to find, there's always more to find, but it is a good starting point. Now let's take a look at the people and creatures you'll find around Varisia, starting with the more monstrous denizens. Now obviously there's a lot of mundane creatures that live in Varisia. Wolves, bears, birds, squirrels, fish, normal stuff. The most unique but mundane creature in the region are the fire-pelt cougars, a large cat with a distinctive black and red pelt. Many rangers and druids in the area use them as animal companions for their superb hunting and stealth skills. But for the more fantastical, the mountains of Varisia are home to numerous species of drakes, which nest in the high peaks and raid the lowlands for food and treasure. Orc tribes in the area make a sport out of taming and riding them. There's even a smaller, more domestic species called house drake that nests in the upper buildings of Korvosa. Many of the mages living in the city take them as familiars or pets. A few true dragons also make their home here, like the red Glarataxis I mentioned earlier. There's also a blue one called Glorifex who lives in the high Kodar Mountains, and a white named Archist who lives far in the north, just south of the border to the land of the Linorm Kings. The green dragon Razorhorn lives in the northern Morani forest, where he works to gain the same infamy of his recently killed mother. Finally, a younger red named Longtooth lives near Jorgenfist, but there are rumors of a few more red dragons stalking the area as well. Since we're talking about big creatures, on a related note, Varisia is home to a variety of giants. Many can be found in the Mindspin Mountains to the east, but the most prominent kind of giant are the stone giants of the Storval Plateau. As we talked about with Mokmorian, these tribes descended from Thassalon's slaves, which gives them a cultural stigma against certain types of magic. Though their legends about Thassalon have been distorted by time, there are several kernels of truth still buried in there. For example, some people still report sightings of the large rune giants that were once their masters, deep in the northern mountains. Nothing concrete, but the rumors are just common enough to keep the fear of the rune giants' return fresh in their minds. Meanwhile, the smaller mountains and lowland forests are home to large clans of ogres and their ogre kin. The largest is the Krieg clan, which makes its home on Hook Mountain. The surrounding woods are home to ogrekin families too weak or disgraced to stay on the mountain. All humans living in Varisia give the ogres a wide berth, their cruelty and cannibalism towards their prisoners well known around the region. There are also scattered hill giants and trolls that roam Varisia, but they are more solitary. The trolls do have one place they congregate, the city of Karamaga on the edge of the Storval Rise. The trolls living here take advantage of their powerful regeneration to act as augurs, performing an act called haruspicy on themselves. Now if you don't know, haruspicy is the act of disemboweling an animal and reading their entrails to divine the future. It's certainly gross, but the fact that the trolls can just shove their guts back in and heal it up at least makes it a humane version? While interesting, the trolls are not the strangest creatures to live in Karamaga. Those exist below the city. Beneath Karamaga is a civilization of creatures from the ethereal plane whose perfect memories stretch back centuries. Known as the Callborn, these strange creatures feed off profound thought and collect memories like treasures, storing them within both their own minds as well as the fruit of a specially cultivated memory tree. The Callborn are probably the most unique group found in Varisia, at least to me. There are rumors of scattered settlements elsewhere, but Karamaga is the closest to a home they have on Galarian. There are also a few infamous unique monsters that haunt parts of Varisia. The Sandpoint Devil is a large horse creature with ragged bat-like wings and blood-stained mauve jagged teeth. It haunts the region around Sandpoint, taking livestock and lone wanderers alike. Some parents will scare their children with stories of the creature carrying off the disobedient, but most in the region treat the creature as all too real. Farther north in the man-made lake of the Storval Deep lurks an ancient creature called Black Maga. With a long neck and tentacled lower body, this creature is believed to be an ancient spawn of Lamashtu. The immortal monster spends centuries sleeping in the depths before waking up to feed and breed. Her mortal spawn can be found swimming in the lake, their sporadic appearances keeping her legend alive. Moving on to the more civilized groups that call Varisia home, we'll start with a group everyone thinks about when they picture a stable society: goblins. The majority of Varisia's goblins inhabit an area called the Rasp. These goblins have clashed with the humans in the region for a long time, but the Chelish colonists escalated things quite a bit. These fights wiped out a lot of the older goblin population, and the current Rasp goblins are forced to piece together their own culture from barely remembered remnants of an oral tradition. So, they tend to come across as violent, anarchic children that revel in murder and sing creepy songs and light things on fire. It's as hilarious as it is tragic. But goblins are as adaptable as they are squishy, with many making their way into civilized spaces and carving out a niche for themselves, like sewer cleaning or pest control. Granted, their version of pest control is collecting all the rats and farming them for food, but progress isn't always linear. Now, dwarves in Varisia are mostly concentrated in Janderhof, one of the few sky citadels still fully occupied by their people. Janderhof has a comfortable trade relationship with Korvosa, but also houses one of the largest populations of Shoanti outside their traditional territory. The dwarves of Janderhof are largely neutral in Varisian affairs, though individual dwarves have ventured out into the wilderness to combat giants and search for ancient treasures of an empire that ruled the surface while they remained below. Orcs and Dromar mostly live in the mountains at the edge of Varisia, where it borders the hold of Belkzen. There is a subculture called the Karmaja orcs that are the majority here, living daring lives high in the mountains where they tame riding drakes to help them navigate the high peaks. There's a lot of animosity between the orcs of the region and the Shoanti, not helped by Belkzen raiding parties crossing the mountain from time to time, or the presence of the orc settlement of Erglin. As a result, Shoanti tribes will not permit any orcs or Dromar to join, even if the individual has proven themselves exceptionally worthy. Halflings generally go where humans do, but the largest halfling population is found in Karamaga. The city is home to countless refugees and outcasts, which makes it a home for escaped slaves freeing from Chelish masters in the former colonial cities. Kaer Maga is full of staunch abolitionists that do not tolerate slavery in any fashion, and the halfling-led resistance can safely headquarter here without any fear of retribution. As for the elves and Ivarans, prior to Earthfall they lived in the northwestern border of Thassalon, where they had an independent nation. Though Thassalon tried to conquer them several times, the Thessalonians' internal strife and the elves' strong defenses repelled the attacks every time. After returning, the elves tried to resettle the area, but found it to be incredibly hostile. The capital of Selwynvian is the toughest nut to crack, haunted by strange monsters and ghosts. The settlement of Crying Leaf works to be a de facto capital for now, while smaller settlements dot the forest at regular intervals. The elves did recently score a victory when they killed the powerful dragon Verchasmia, who made the city her lair for years and whose cruelty was legendary. Her son Razorhorn both looks to continue her work as well as step out of his mother's shadow, but he hasn't made any moves just yet. Progress remains slow, and many elves are wandering out into Varisia looking for something more hopeful to dedicate themselves to. Gnomes can largely just be found wandering around, looking for whatever interests them. There are a few gnomish settlements in the Sanos forest, hiding from the outside world deep in the woods, but just as many gnomes flit from place to place. Their inconsistent wandering is a nice bit of consistency when you think about it. Finally, we move on to humans, which means it's time to talk more in depth about the Varisians and the Shoanti. But first, just to get them out of the way, most of the Chelish settlers have either stuck to the main cities along the coast or migrated inland along the rivers. They didn't really integrate into Varisian society, but are more tolerant of existing alongside them, at least compared to the Shoanti. Speaking of the Shoanti, let's talk about them. As we've mentioned before, the Shoanti divide themselves into various clans called Qua. Like, literally, the Shoanti word for clan is Qua. The 7 Qua all have a kind of niche, a specialization they are known for. Obviously not everyone in a Qua is like this, but many members of the Qua take pride in mastering their clan's unique rituals, traditions, and skills. The Qua all have a section of northern Varisia they consider their territory, with minimal overlap between them. Large-scale conflict between the clans is almost unheard of, even with the scarce resources of the Storval Plateau. Though loyal to their specific clan first, the Shoanti people are largely united in their own survival in a world that has, especially recently, been quite cruel to them. Some universal elements are shared among all the Qua, like their tattoos. Young Shoanti are given a name by the tribe that is only meant to be used while they are children, untested and unproven. This name will only be used later in life by close family or friends. When they come of age, a Shoanti youth will undergo a rite of passage, which when completed marks them as a full member of the tribe. This is also when they receive their first tattoo, a symbol specific to their clan that marks them as an adult. Most Shoanti will go on to have many more tattoos in their life to commemorate significant events. These tattoos are usually based on a variety of runes the Qua considers sacred or important to their identity. Shoanti worship is generally primal and naturalistic, focused on wild spirits and totemic representations of animals. They do pay homage to some gods, such as Desna, Gorum, Gazra, and Pharasma, for their aspects that most fit into Shoanti culture. Though not explicit, it's likely that the Shoanti would look particularly harshly on the worship of devils or Asmodeus, considering his connection to the Chelish colonizers. Moving on to the individual Qua, we'll start with the Lyrunic Qua, the Moon Clan. Their current territory is in the Cinderlands, to the east of the Wyvern Mountains, with their southern border defined by the Yandabakari River and their northern border by the Kazaran River. The Moon Clan are well known for their archery and hunting skills. Fitting their name, the Moon Clan prefers to hunt at night, using the bright moon and stars to find their way. Their tattoos usually depict symbols associated with the night sky, signifying clarity of sight and wisdom. Much farther west, we have the Shade Qua, the Axe Clan. They live along the northern coast of the Varisian Gulf, between the shore and the Kalifak Mountains. Their territory is small and naturally isolated, which the Axe Clan prefers, being distrustful of anyone that isn't a Shoanti. The Axe Clan are expert seafarers, adept at fishing and diving in the waters of the Varisian Gulf. They aren't raiders or pirates though, which contrasts them quite a bit with the nearest settlement of Riddleport. The Axe Clan Shoanti want nothing to do with the city they see as being full of liars and thieves. Axe Clan tattoos depict the ocean and its creatures, as well as ideas of vitality and endurance, the strength to stand against the battering waves. Next we have the Qua I'm the most afraid of pronouncing, the Shrikiri Qua. Thankfully that translates to the Hawk Clan, which is much easier on me. The Hawk Clan holds the most territory still located in the Varisian lowlands, stretching from near the town of Roderick's Cove on the Varisian Gulf down into the Churlwood, where the border cuts west to the Storval Stairs, skirting around Hook Mountain territory. It then heads north until it reaches roughly the fork of the Chirali River, where the border flows back down to where it started. It's important to remember that this isn't a formal nation border, just the generally accepted territory the clan claims for themselves. This is why we see these borders so often follow rivers and mountain ranges almost exactly. The Hawk Clan are also the most widely traveled Shoanti, wandering all around Varisia. If you meet a Shoanti in the wilderness, it's most likely you'll be meeting one of the Hawk Clan. They consider wild animals sacred and will often bond with them as partners. Most commonly, as I'm sure you can guess from the name, they bond hawks as hunting partners, though horses are also common. These two animals are also the most common ones found on Hawk Clan tattoos, along with symbols suggesting wind, travel, and wilderness. The Hawk Clan are considered the most peaceful Shoanti clan towards outsiders, and they are the most likely to allow a non-Shoanti to join their clan. This openness towards outsiders is somewhat shared with the Shundar Qua, the Spire Clan. This clan has the largest territory, stretching across the plateau from the Alaran River in the west all the way to the Kazaran River in the east, which defines the border all the way to the Storval Deep. From there it hooks north to meet the Storval Rise, which it follows up until it can hang left and swing around the Nashers mountain range to meet up again. This territory is littered with Thessalonian ruins that the Spire clan guard as sacred. The Spire clan view themselves as diplomats and unifiers, keeping the peace between the other clans. It's thanks to their efforts that the clans have kept the peace for so long, despite being very different in many ways. The Spire clan also acts as diplomats to outsiders and seek to represent the Shoanti people as a whole. Many of them actually want to unite the clans together into a single Shoanti nation, for lack of a better term, but this has faced quite a bit of difficulties. While the other clans see the point in uniting against outside forces when appropriate, pride and devotion to their own clan makes them wary of losing that identity to a greater nation. The other hurdle that they face is that the nation most likely to have interactions with the Shoanti, Cheliax, neither respects their culture or recognizes their territory. Still, the Shoanti clans respect the Spire clan as a force for unity and cohesion among their people. Spire clan tattoos favor images of eyes to represent watchfulness, as well as symbols depicting unity and leadership. One thing to keep in mind is a question. If the Spire clan are watching the Thessalonian ruins, what exactly are they watching them for? The Sklarqua, the Sun clan, are in many ways the opposite of the Spire clan. Intensely xenophobic, the Sun clan inhabit the Cinderlands, a particularly hot and dangerous area of the Storval Plateau. Their territory overlaps with the Moon clan extensively, following the Mindspan Mountains up to the Kazaran River. The Sun clan was one of the two involved in the last Shoanti War, and they have a deep hatred for Cheliax as a result of that war. Their border also makes them frequent targets for the Orcs in Belkzen. As a result, the Sun clan are almost constantly at war. This has shaped them into the most aggressive and confrontational of the clans. They are master horsemen, utilizing animals in destructive charges and hit-and-run raids. They've also mastered the very heat of the Cinderlands itself, many of them gaining a primal connection with fire. Given the geography, as well as a few other context clues that are technically spoilers for upcoming stories, it's very likely that the Sun clan were the ones that originally lived around the pyramid in Korvosa prior to the arrival of Chelish settlers. They've lost a lot of territory and are more eager than ever to reclaim it. Sun clan tattoos usually depict images of fire and battle, symbolizing strength and resilience as well as triumph over their enemies. The Sun clan are the Shoanti outsiders are most likely to have a hostile interaction with. The Skoanqua are the Skull clan, and they have the smallest territory of any clan, with only two small locations. One is located within Sun clan territory, while the other is near the edge of the Spire clan territory, near the Stony Mountains. The Skull clan was the other clan that joined the Sun clan to drive off Chelish colonists, a decision they paid for ever since. The Skull clan, fitting their lovely name, are a morbid lot who focus largely on death. They are in charge of maintaining Shoanti oral tradition and tending their ancient burial grounds. This includes making sure the dead stay restful, the Skull clan routinely clearing out undead and any haunts that have moved into old graves. Their clan territory is centered around these two large burial sites, one in the Cinderlands and one in the Western Mountains. Skulls and bones are an obvious motif to their tattoos, as well as the symbols for duty and eternity to represent their constant watch over their people's history. And now we come to the final clan, the Tamirqua, who are the Wind clan. Their territory stretches down between the Chevali River and the Stony Mountains, between the Hawk and Axe clans. Geographically and culturally isolated, the Wind clan rarely interacts with outsiders, except when raiding lowlanders for supplies they can't easily acquire for themselves. Their tattoos usually have imagery combining the solid rock of their mountain homes and the swift wind from which they take their name. The Shoanti are a resilient people, with deep ties to the region's past that outsiders have a hard time truly understanding. Many researchers and academics from the Chelish colony cities view Varisia's Thessalonian ruins as a trove of ancient knowledge and treasures, but the Shoanti have lived among the ruins long enough to know that what is buried underneath is usually better off left buried. Now that we've gone over the Shoanti, let's touch on the Varisians. Their nomadic nature means they are much more scattered than the Shoanti, but also less starkly divided. Varisians consider each other to all be members of the same family, treating other Varisians like long-lost cousins. Many will do whatever they reasonably can to help family, especially against outsiders. This even extends to the black sheep of the Varisian family, the Skzarni, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing wrong, but I'm going to try at least say it wrong consistently. The Skzarni are a loose collection of crime families that operate in Varisia. Their focus is on petty, non-violent crime primarily, in order to maximize profit and minimize risk. They will avoid targeting Varisians whenever possible, taking from outsiders and specifically Chelish ones when they can get away with it. The families are all very independent, with little in common from one another outside their ethnicity and general operations. While small time in the grand scheme of things, the Skzarni have enough of a reputation that outsiders associate Varisians with them, to the point of an ugly stereotype. For their part, non-Skzarni Varisians don't care for the family, viewing their actions as contributing to the negative attitudes people have towards all Varisians. They are still considered family though, and a Varisian will help a Skzarni out to protect them from a non-Varisian. With that, we now have a good picture of who lives in Varisia and how they make their way in the world. For our final segment, we'll look at the various landmarks and cities that dot the countryside to see what an adventurer with a thirst for epic quests and sweet loot might want to visit. We'll also touch on places that will be important to a few of our upcoming stories, as Varisia is poised to undergo a massive change in the next few years. We've talked about Korvosa a lot in this video, its founding and the conflicts it caused being key parts of the colonization of Varisia by the Chelish. Though it's now an independent city, the colonial roots run deep. I'll do a video just about the city at a later date because there's a lot to talk about. But for now, let's quickly highlight its current state. Korvosa is a monarchical city ruled by King Eadred Arabesti II, though Eadred was not his birth name. He took the name of a previous, more popular ruler to bolster his own credibility. Eadred is a steady but unremarkable ruler when it comes to politics, but in private it's a very different matter. A man in his 60s, Eadred has a fondness for women of a much younger persuasion. After numerous scandals behind closed doors, he finally married the current Queen Iliosa in 4704, when she was 18. Yikes, my dude. Although not a glamorous power couple, these two have kept Korvosa running in the 3 years since. Just south of Korvosa is Citadel Vrade, home to a strong contingent of Hell Knights from the Order of the Nail. The Hell Knights stationed here work for Korvosa as independent enforcers and mercenaries. Their 400-strong force is able to march quickly to the city whenever the government needs to re-establish order in the most violent manner possible. Northeast of Korvosa is Genderhof, the Dwarven Sky Citadel. Well fortified and independent, the large dwarven city acts as a neutral trade hub for craftsmen from all around Varisia. It's notably one of the few places in the region where Shoanti and Chelish people can exist without extreme tension. Genderhof actually has the largest Shoanti population outside their clan holdings and the most diverse mix of clans found in the region. Though initially built to survive massive sieges, Genderhof has remained relatively peaceful since its construction, even with the hold of Belkson so close by. To the northwest, along the Storval Rise, you can find the city of Kermaga. We've touched on the strange people you can find there, but the city itself is worth looking deeper into. Kermaga is likely the oldest city in the region, being old when the Thessalonians first discovered it. The Callborn had lived below it for centuries, but even they didn't know who built it. Whoever made Kermaga was long gone when they showed up, and these builders haven't shown any signs of returning. Today, Kermaga is home to outcasts, refugees, and anyone too weird to find somewhere else to live. The city is held in a delicate balance between its various powers, who can disagree on much but at least agree on keeping the city and its people free from outside occupation and influence. Hashtag keep Kermaga weird. Heading west along the Rise, many small towns line the Yonda-Bakari River, which meets with the waters flowing from the Storval Deep, a large lake created by a massive Thessalonian-built dam. The dam is a marvel of magical engineering, with sluice gates in the shape of a runelord's face automatically opening when the Storval Deep gets too full. At the base of the dam is the town of Turtleback Ferry, which was originally plagued by attacks from the ogres of the nearby Hook Mountain. Turning to Magnamar for aid, despite being closer to Korvosa, the city established an order of rangers to protect the town out of the newly constructed Fort Rannoch. The Order of the Black Arrow broke the ogre clans apart in 4662, and they've never amassed enough power to strike back since. But there are rumors swirling of something dark coming to Turtleback Ferry, and Hook Mountain is also stirring, with the possible new leader gathering the ogres and their kin for another assault on the town. Heading back south to follow the Yonda-Bakari River, we find the southern coast of Varisia taken up by swamplands called the Mushfens. Home to goblin tribes, boggards, and all manner of swamp beasts, the Mushfens are a perilous place to explore. But many people will brave the fetid waters because there are rumors of Thessalonian ruins buried below the muck just waiting to be found. The two most famous landmarks are the Sunken Queen to the east and the Lady's Light to the west. The Sunken Queen is a partially buried Thessalonian pyramid decorated with a massive carving of a nude woman, believed to be Runelord Sorshan. There are legends of what might be inside, but little fact to corroborate any of them. The Lady's Light, meanwhile, is a large lighthouse built to resemble a beautiful woman in flowing robes holding a staff, also believed to be Sorshan, but much more covered up. Though the Lady's Light is a staple for sailors in the region as a landmark, few people venture close due to the dangers that surround the place. North of Lady's Light is Varisia's second largest city, Magnamar. It's built in the shadow of the Irespan, a massive bridge of ancient stone extending from the nearby cliffs just into the sea before abruptly ending. The stone of the Irespan is special, as hard as iron while retaining the properties of stone, heavily resilient to weathering. Magnamar's workers take what they can from the structure without risking collapse, but that isn't as safe as it might sound. The Irespan has many hidden chambers and hollows that contain ancient things, some horribly dangerous and very hungry. Any stone found beneath the waves is exceptionally valuable, and there's a whole industry of workers who hunt up and down the coast for any they can find. Magnamar, in contrast to Korvosa's monarchy, is governed by a council of mostly elected officials. It's not a true democracy, some seats have been held by noble families for generations, but the Council of Ushers has 117 seats held by a large selection of Magnamaran citizens. Ironically, this means the council is often deadlocked over a difference of opinion, which leaves the ruling of Magnamar to the office of the Lord Mayor. The current Lord Mayor is a man named Haldmer Groberus, who uses the power of the Lord Mayor's office to enrich himself alongside anyone willing to bribe him. His more eccentric whims are kept in check by his assistant, who edits the mayor's mandates into something more reasonable and enforceable. Though Groberus is not the best leader, he is enough of a shrewd politician to maintain his position. Magnamar is the protector of several cities in Varisia, helping to enforce law and provide services in exchange for taxes. One of the most important to our history is Sandpoint, which we've already talked about a lot. Sandpoint will also be getting its own video after this, so we'll be moving on rather quickly from here. North of Sandpoint on the Lost Coast is the Windsong Abbey, a religious haven for worshippers of all deities to come together in peace and discuss matters of theology and philosophy. Originally constructed in 4082, the abbey is run by a woman known only as the Masked Abbess. She, along with a few advisors, are aware that the abbey is built on a much older, more mysterious structure. From the time it was built until Erodin's death, the Windsong Abbey collected a large number of religious texts, some quite heretical. Following the last Aslante's death, many faiths withdrew from the abbey, which is now a shadow of its former glory. Still, if you're looking for obscure religious texts, there are a few better places to look. Up the coast from the abbey is the town of Roderick's Cove. Founded by privateer Alric Roderick, the town was established as a haven from the predatory pirates of nearby Riddleport. It found success and thrived, even after Roderick was killed by those very same pirates, and has remained independent ever since. Though small compared to Riddleport, anyone looking to do more legitimate business might find it a good stopping point. There are rumors around town that the recent peace with the pirate city is coming from some underhanded deals, but no proof has yet surfaced of this. Since we're on the subject, let's jaunt over to Riddleport. The pirate town is a rough place, where the only law is what you can enforce for yourself. Now, that might beg a question, wait, why is this pirate town called Riddleport? Well, that's because of the town's most prominent landmark, a large metallic arch called the Cipher Gate stretching across the harbor, covered in strange runes. No one knows what it's for, what the runes mean, or how to do anything with it. This mystery is so prominent that a group called the Cipher Mages has been founded to research the structure and try and figure out exactly what it's doing. As a city that draws outlaws and academics alike, Riddleport has a very strange mix of people making up its population. Off the east coast of Varisia is a small chain of islands which surround the Varisian Gulf. Prior to Earthfall, there were a mountain range at the edge of the coast, but the falling fragments of the Starstone broke apart the land here, turning the highest points into an island chain. While most of the islands are full of scattered ruins, the largest island, Rivenrake, is home to an important landmark, the Hollow Mountain. The largest mountain in the region, it is easily distinguished by the massive face carved into the side. Looking like a stern Thessalonian woman, likely a different rune lord than the one carved into the Sunken Queen, this monument glares down at the land over her with imperious contempt. The only flaw is a large rent in the carving, caused by a natural disaster, which exposes the interior complex of the mountain. Occasionally, strange mutated creatures will emerge, terrorizing the land all around. Just from the glimpses this opening gives, it's obvious the entire mountain contains a massive complex home to ancient Thessalonian horrors. That covers the major settlements and landmarks of the lowlands, so what I'm going to do now is rapid fire some of the smaller locations in the region before we cover the Storval Plateau and the northern reaches of Varisia. Ready, set, go. Harsh is a small village built on a river crossing that mostly serves as a hub for the outlying farms to trade with Korvosa. It's mostly known for its horses. Melfesh is Korvosa's largest holding outside the main city, acting as a military hub for supporting the outlying settlements. It also handles shipping down the Yondabakari River, especially the taxation of goods. Biston is a cliffside town that, in the recent past, attempted to declare independence from Korvosa. The Korvosan Sable Company responded in full force, putting down rebellion and placing the town under martial law, which King Eodred only recently lifted. Ilsurian is a farming and fishing town along the Yondabakari River. The residents were originally concerned with Korvosa's political climate after the Chelish Civil War, preparing themselves to overthrow the government, but time has dulled that anger and Ilsurian is content to keep to itself now. Whistledown is a caravan town where quite a few of those caravans meet up. Populated by mostly humans and gnomes, the town is well known for, of all things, its exquisite musical instruments. Sipple Rose is a small gnomish community in the Sanos Forest. The gnomes there keep mostly to themselves, so little is known about the town to anyone outside of it. Wardle is an old town at the edge of the Mush Fens that hasn't really changed in decades. It remains a frontier town visited by trappers and swamp dwellers with little to entice outsiders to pay it a visit. Nybor is a settlement just south of Ember Lake and is an incredibly progressive settlement. This reputation has led to couples whose love would be considered forbidden elsewhere to come here for a chance at welcome. As a result, Nybor has a large population of people with mixed ancestry parentage. Galduria is another town on the shores of Ember Lake. While it largely conducts trade in grains and lumber, its actual claim to fame is the Twilight Academy, an arcane college that rivals the various institutions in Magnamar and Korvosa, despite the smaller size and lower student population. Wolfseer is a small lakeside town with a larger-than-average lycanthrope population, acting as a haven for people afraid of hurting others when their affliction rampages during full moons. Ravenmoor is an isolated settlement along the Lampback River. During the day, it's the picture of a normal settlement, with minimal trade, but the inhabitants are very clear that outsiders are not welcome once the sun comes down. There's a dark secret lurking here, just waiting to be found. We also have two landmarks to cover. Viper Wall is a notorious and sinister keep built on the shores of Ember Lake. Sporting conical towers and carvings of snakes that emit strange light and poisonous fog, who built this place and why remains a mystery. Some attribute it to Thassalon, but the architecture doesn't match up, while others claim it was serpent folk setting up a surface settlement. With the locals avoiding the area, no one truly knows what might be inside. Devil's Elbow is a small island off the coast near Riddleport, believed to be cursed by the pirates that frequented the city. Part of this curse stems from a siren named Varashi, who lived on the island until she was killed a few years ago. Her tragic tale is a story for another time, but for now, know that her ghost is rumored to still lurk somewhere on the island. And now we head to the northern portion of Varisia, where the Shoanti and Varisians live with little to no Chelish interference. Getting up here is difficult, especially from the western end, where the Storval rise can get up to 1,000 feet high, with sheer cliffs most of that distance. The eastern portion is more easily accessed by sea, but the isolated mountain ranges that dot the area make traveling inland a difficult prospect. There is one easier access to the plateau called the Storval Stairs. Built in Thessalonian times at a comparative low point, this series of switchback stairs and ramps was built to allow giant slaves to more easily move cargo up and down the rise. And while it was built for giants, smaller stairs more suited to the average size ancestry accompany the giant steps the whole way up. This makes the stairs the best way for anyone to get to the western half of the plateau from the lowlands. As you can imagine, this also makes it a very effective bottleneck, though at the moment the Shoanti Hawk clan who control the area don't seem interested in restricting travel. Though occupied, the northern part of Varisia doesn't have as many large settlements or towns, since most of its occupants are nomadic. A big exception is the elves that occupy the Marani Forest. Though they haven't regained control of the capital deep in the woods, the elves have set up 2 settlements on either side of the forest, Cryingleaf in the west and Asmaril in the east, to act as staging points and keep an eye on things. Of the two, Cryingleaf is larger and more busy, while Asmaril has a population of less than 300 elves living in it. The only other large settlement we have to cover is Erglin, and it's a massive outlier in the region. The only major Orcish city in Avestan outside of Belkzen, Erglin is highly isolated geographically and politically. Though Erglin does have a large population of non-orcs, it's mostly outcast Shoanti without a clan and a smattering of giants. Outsiders are allowed, but not exactly given the warmest of welcomes. The local Shoanti still associated with the clan consider it an enemy city and will raid it on a regular basis, with the Erglin orcs raiding them right back just as often. Though tied with Belkzen, the Orc Nation would likely offer little assistance if Erglin called for aid. After all, Belkzen doesn't have a formal military, and many consider self-sufficiency an important part of their culture. Erglin has survived that test so far, but the Storval Plateau is a harsh place and tomorrow is never guaranteed. While northern Varisia doesn't have many cities, it does have a wide variety of sights to behold, from strange ruins to mundane wonders. Starting on the east coast, we have Crystalline, a large sphere made up of, well, apparently crystal. Highly reflective, the crystal surface is visible for miles on bright days. While not completely clear, it's translucent enough to allow outsiders to see inside. What they see is a Thessalonian city, plucked out of time and suspended inside on a constant time loop. Any attempt to get in has failed, so scholars are stuck watching what they can see from the outside and trying to extrapolate what they can from that. Moving back to the coast, we have Brinewall, an abandoned Chelish settlement from earlier in the colonization effort. Though originally intended to encourage trade and discourage attacks from the northern nations, Brinewall was constantly underfunded and disregarded by the Chelish. Though garrisoned for a good while, eventually the defenders were mysteriously wiped out and the location was abandoned, where it remains to this day. Nearby is the Rift of Niltak, a weird mist-filled valley full of strange plants and animals. Giant insects can be seen occasionally, and some kind of screeching creature is constantly heard, but that's all anyone has properly documented. Anybody exploring inside either doesn't come out or emerges incoherent and unable to survive for long, often taking their own life. Probably best left avoided in my opinion. Moving west we have Wormwood Hall, an overgrown manor deep in the Lurkwood Forest. Strange runes adorn the threshold of the front door, and the interior is completely unknown. No record of anyone entering or exiting the house exists, and no sign of habitation has been seen. For now, Wormwood Hall sits as a quiet mystery in Varisia's upland forest. Rhymeskull is a large mountain carved with a massive skull, similar to other Thessalonian carvings of rune lords that can be found throughout the region. This one seems like an outlier, not appearing like any known rune lord. Near the base of the mountain is a ring of 7 statues, all facing inward, their purpose unknown. Expeditions to Rhymeskull to investigate these monuments are hampered by the mountain's main occupant, the large white dragon Arkist, who attacks anyone who enters their territory. Mopad Lay, which translates literally as steps into hell in Shoanti, is a large pit located at the base of the Kodar Mountains. Perfectly circular, the pit has a set of steps carved into the side, descending a few hundred feet. The pit extends far below these stairs, requiring anyone that wants to go deeper to climb or fly down. Divination attempts into the bottom have been known to kill the caster, so proceed with caution. Given the depth, Mobad Lay likely extends deep into the Darklands, past the first layer and into Sekamina. Descend at your own risk because nothing has yet been seen climbing back out. Giltspur is a large Thessalonian ruin on the northern Storval Plateau. During the Empire's height, it was an outpost and research station for contact with the strange dimension of Leng. However, during Thassalon's time, a volcanic eruption in the Kodar Mountains partially buried the complex, its denizens fleeing into Leng. What has happened to them since is a mystery, Giltspur sitting quiet and abandoned. Recently, the blue dragon Kadrakasta has begun excavating the site, for reasons known only to her. Whatever she's looking for, it's probably best she doesn't find it, but I don't know who's gonna stop her. The Callow Mounds are a sacred Shoanti burial site located in the southwestern part of the plateau on the edge of the Cinderlands. One of the Skull Clan's holdings, the Callow Mounds are a highly respected burial site and quite dangerous to approach without proper protection. The Skull Clan shamans protect the site with complex rituals and potent death magic. Unless you have their permission, you'd be wise to avoid the area. Mundate, or more properly the obelisk forest of Mundate, is a desolate valley filled with 10-foot-high stones, each carved with complex runes from Thessalonian times. Given a wide berth by the Shawanti, the Chelish colonists that entered the region naturally assumed that the giant rocks were hollow and full of treasure because they're very smart. After taking the time to break one open, they found the stones were indeed hollow, and filled with desiccated human bodies who'd clearly died in a horrible and agonizing way. This wonderful fact discovered, the colonists left the area only to find themselves pursued and killed by strange undead creatures. Now everyone gives Mundate a wide berth. And with that, we've covered the entire map. Except if you're paying attention, you'll see that the little corner in the upper right is blurred out. There's one more landmark we haven't covered, but I'm keeping that one a secret for now. Trust me, we're going to get very familiar with that location in the near future. But for now, keep it in your mind as a fun mystery to unravel. Varisia is a cornerstone of the Pathfinder universe, and so many stories start here. Our first adventure path, Rise of the Rune Lords, explores a lot of the region's history and landmarks. But even now, after decades of Pathfinder lore adding to the region, there are still places with mystery left to them. Varisia might be well covered, but it's far from fully explored. Thank you very much for watching this video, Pathfinders. I hope you enjoyed this brief look at Varisia. Tell me about your favorite detail or location down in the comments. Are you excited to see what's inside these ancient ruins, or do you think they should be left alone? And if you're that second kind of person, I get where you're coming from, but have you considered how fun it is to touch random old stuff? Like, it can't all curse you. And if it does, those curses just, fight inside your body and cancel out, right? Pretty sure that's how it works. But enough from me, because I've got places to be and things to touch, and I'm pretty sure you do too. Please remember to press all the YouTube buttons, and if you can, please check out the Patreon linked below. Until next time, Pathfinders, explore, report, and cooperate.